being here. This is going to be super fun. I actually just read Eric's book not too long ago. And it's a short story collection, which I think is a really cool, fun way to get to know an author because it's little snippets of different areas they like to write in versus like selling yourself into like 600 to 800 pages. You're like, oh no. Um, so, kind of tell me about how you decided you wanted your first kind of book to be a short story collection versus just hitting it hard with a book.
Well, short form horror for me has always been my favorite way to digest horror. It goes back to when I was a kid. I I liked. I grew up in the '80s, so the '80s was in the early '90s was kind of like this heyday for anthologized horror television shows. Stuff like Tales from the Dark Side, Tales from the Crypt, Alfred Hitchcock Presents was on like not Nick at Night at the time. They did a lot of that stuff, and I was a really big fan of that format. And I watched Alfred Hitchcock Presents with my grandmother when she would watch me. And I went to my library when I was in like third grade, and I saw Alfred Hitchcock's name on a book, and I pulled it off, and it was a book of short stories directed at children that he had put together. He did several of these, and we had about two or three in our library. So I grabbed as many as I could, and I checked them out, and I tore through them. And then when I got done, I asked my librarian, "Is there more of this?" And she reached across the aisle all the way to the top shelf, and she pulls out this book from that was an anthology edited by a woman named Helen Hoke. At, and she anthologized horror that wasn't necessarily aimed at children, but these were older stories by like Lovecraft, Poe, Bradbury. So I think there was a Shirley Jackson, Hazel Heald, people like that. And she hands me this book and she says, "We have a few of these." And I fell in love. You know, I've read a lot of Stephen King short horror, short story collections and things like that. So I knew when I started writing, the first thing I wanted to do was focus on short horror. It gives you, in my estimation, I think that's the best way to start. A lot of people want to start with novels, but I think that you need to get a grasp of storytelling, a sense of place, of, and it helps you with brevity. I find that a lot of people, a lot of like I read Slush and for a magazine. And a lot of people, times I'll see people writing a short story and they'll start out with 5 pages of, just setup. Nothing happens. And I'm like, you need to figure out how to get to the meat and potatoes immediately. You don't need to like waste my time. And so I think it helps if you build up that skill set so that later on when you do go to write a novel, then you already have it. You know exactly what you need to do to tell a story from beginning to end. And so that's why I wanted to start there. Plus, I love short horror. I think it works best. Horror works best in the short form. So I wanted that first thing to be a short story collection.
I love both, but there really is something about a short story. You have to pack so much of a punch in such a short space, and you got to do it right. And when it's done right, it just leaves you wanting more, but being okay with what you got too at the same time. Absolutely love that. Which I want to ask TJ about. Editing a whole long novel is one thing. How it seems like it would be harder to try to edit short stories because you've got like this little chunk of space where you like, what are you editing? How are you doing that? Is it easier or harder, do you think?
I don't think that one or the other is necessarily more or less difficult. It is a very different process. I would like to say that coming into this, most of these stories in and of themselves were complete. I didn't do a lot of developmental editing on the stories themselves. Most of them had been previously published and were pretty well polished in and of themselves in their final form. What I brought to the table was more of the sequencing of the stories and kind of the concept behind the book. If you could think of it as like a scaffolding of something, how do you put stories together? Which one comes when? And how do you present this as a collection, as a book? Maintaining interest throughout from story to story to story, kind of creating a larger story for all of the smaller stories to fit inside of. And thankfully, I had really awesome material to work with when I was trying to figure it out. Kind of like a mixtape of your favorite songs. You know what I mean? Like you try and figure out where the
Yes.
song leads to what song, and that's kind of what I did here with Eric's book, and that was my role. So.
I love that. That's actually a really good take on it. I hadn't really thought about creating a little mixtape of the stories. And it makes sense because if I've read some collections slash anthos where it wasn't really thought about how the stories flowed into each other. And even if they're completely different topics, they still need to make some kind of sense. And Straw World, it made sense. It was nice. I liked that.
That's excellent. I'm glad to hear that it worked. We came up with a concept pretty early on. I'm a big fanboy for the title story. It was my first Erik story, the first Erik story I ever read. And I read it in the pages of Vestarian. And I think I'm saying it Vestarian. I'm not sure. In any case, great magazine, lots and lots of fantastic writing in that in their pages. And Erik's story, Straw World, really hit me, really struck me as like, wow, okay, this is world building, but it's not just world building. There's a lot of things going on in that story, commentaries on art, commentaries on engaging with art, walking through an exhibition or an art piece. And I thought that was a really interesting metaphor for reading a book. Like you're engaging with a work of art, but you're also reading a book and you're reading the book that's reading the book. So there was an interesting kind of overarching structure to that story that I felt extrapolated really well to the rest of Erik's work. And hence, that's the scaffolding we ended up using and why we ended up calling it Straw World.
That's such a good thought. I always feel a little guilty when I'm reading a short story collection when my favorite story is basically the title story, because I'm like, oh, you're being so basic about this. But like after hearing that explanation, I'm like, okay, I feel a lot better about picking that and picking that on other ones, because it's like, okay, well, this is kind of meant to be. No wonder that's the title. So I actually like that. That's interesting.
Well, good. Well, never feel bad about anything that's your favorite about anything reading wise. I mean, if something in a book is your favorite, then there's a reason for it.
True.
Necessarily
True.
Just because it's the title. Have pride in your favorites. That's very important.
It is. It's very important. Erik, tell me a little bit about how you came up with some of the stories in the book. And I don't want to just like make you throw blindly dart wise. So I guess if you had to pick a favorite out of the collection, what would it be of yours? Pick your favorite child. No big deal.
Well, I don't have a problem. I like picking favorites, and I do have a favorite story of mine. It's the last story in the book. It's Demodorum. I don't think that it's going to be everyone's favorite. It's a very niche story. It calls back to a time like I grew up, like I said, reading these Helen Hope collections. Well, she was well past her collecting days when I first picked up one of her books. I think she died in 1990. So I think right around the time I was getting into her work, she was gone. She did most of her anthologizing in the 50s and the 60s, and she slowed down. I think her last one was like 85. She did it with her son. And she was collecting stuff from the late 1800s to like the mid 50s. And so a lot of those stories that I started reading were stuff from like the early 1900s. And it was a very different type of prose style I fell in love with. And when I first started writing, that's what I was writing. So my favorite type of horror story, my favorite type of prose is that. So Demodorum is my favorite, probably because that's the closest to me, like hitting that Clark Ashton Smith, very romantic, gothic style of writing. Whereas most of the other stuff, I try to train myself. I started reading contemporary fiction, seeing how it was done so that I could like refine my prose style to be more palatable to a modern audience. But personally, that's my favorite. I don't know that if it's my best, but it's my favorite.
I always like to ask that question when I'm like, what's your favorite? And I'm like, I don't want to hear what you think the best is or what others think the best is. I want to know your favorite, because that's the real answer. So thank you for that. Which made me think about, how do you write? Or do you plan, do you plot, or you just absolutely wing it? Or are you a little bit of a mixture of both? I found out asking this question, there's so many different answers, and it's so interesting.
I prefer to plot. Generally, when I write, almost nothing that I've written has come out of me not having sat down, outlined it ahead of time, and knowing exactly what I'm writing every single time I sit down at the computer to write. I know where the story's going. I know where it begins and where it ends. I have to, generally. Interestingly enough, Demodorum, my favorite story, was not written that way. I had a general idea of what I wanted to do, and then I just kind of, every time I sat down, I was like, okay, what comes next? And I just went ahead. I don't know why I decided to write the story that way, but it worked out, obviously. But most of the time, I have to have a really detailed outline because my brain doesn't work that way.
Interesting. Do you do a lot of research into your stuff, or do you think you pick things to write about that you kind of already knew about and you don't need as much research?
I do a little bit. It depends on, like, for instance, when I wrote The Man Who Collected Legati, I did quite a bit of research just so I could get that story exactly right. Um, or like certain details of things, like in the last case of Jonah Wexley Abbott, there's some details about, like, for instance, the name John Doe or Jane Doe. Those names are not have not always been the case. A long time ago, if they had a person whose name they didn't know, it wasn't John Doe, it was Richard Roe. So, like, there's a detail in that. So I found that out because the guy was given a name 100 years prior to the story taking place. I needed to know what they would have called him so I could be accurate. Things like that. But I don't generally do a lot. I tend to stick to things that I know, mostly out of laziness. But
Oh my goodness. Well, with this being kind of like your first debut collection, whole release situation, are you already thinking about what you want to go to next / writing something, or where are you at right now?
I
If I'm
write.
allowed to ask, if you're
I,
allowed to say.
I write like George R. R. Martin, so it's really difficult to get me in front of the computer to actually bang anything out. I am thinking ahead, though. I think that I'm going to weave short story writing, keeping that muscle. I think Stephen King says you always want to try to crank out a few short stories here and there so you can keep that muscle, working or not atrophied. But I do think I need to move on to something longer form, maybe a novella or a novel. I've been really thinking about, like, first novel, what I want to do. I've got a couple of non-horror ideas, but I think I'm going to try to write a horror novel first before I try to branch out to other genres. So I think novel is probably next as far as big project goes. The next book I'll put out will hopefully be a novel.
Ooh, that's going to be exciting. Do you have any ideas banging around for it, or are you just not there yet, if that makes sense?
I got one that started out as a movie idea one time I had that I mused on, and I got a little bit into it, and I couldn't figure out how to tell the rest of the story, but I have the basic building blocks for probably the first quarter, I want to say, or maybe a third of a book. And so, because I was like, well, I'm never going to get to make a movie, but I could write a novel, so I can adapt this idea into a novel. But I still have no idea how I'm going to continue past what I already have. And then I have another one. I want to try to do, like, with Jonah Wexley Abbott. I wanted to try to do a classic weird tale with all the tropes thrown in to get it out of my system. This pastiche tropey story. Get it all out, see if I can make it work. I think I'd like to try to do that maybe with a haunted house novel. I know everyone loves haunted houses and everybody tries to approach it in a different way, the House of Leaves or a Head Full of Ghosts, things like that. I'd like to just to see what I might be able to do using the stuff that interests me about horror fiction and see if I can turn that into a haunted house novel. So I'll probably end up doing that, but I do have that other idea.
I think that's a good thing about haunted houses, because people are like, there's so many haunted house books. I'm like, but so many different haunted house books. There's so many things that could be scary. I literally think I wrote a review earlier and I was like, there could be evil people, evil ghosts, just evil neighbors. You don't even know. There's so many options. It could literally just be some people messing around or some raccoons outside your house. You don't know.
Absolutely.
But I love that. And I look forward to whatever else you write, because honestly, your short story collection was so, so good. It got me excited to see what else you decide to come out with later.
Well, thank you.
Which I'm also glad to hear you're going to stay dabbling in short stories, because I think they definitely keep people interested, fans interested, in between the big, long novels, novellas, and all of that fun stuff. Because I'm sure it's not easy just sitting down and knocking out a book, which reminds me of my next question. How long do you think it averaged, I guess, to write one of your short stories that's in that collection?
When I actually do sit down and commit myself to writing a short story, it usually only takes me a week or two. Usually about a week and a half or two to get a first draft, which for me is really more of a second or third draft, because the writing process that I use is I write 600 to 800 words in a session, and then I'll spend the rest of the day sporadically pulling that up on my phone, reading it through, editing it, pulling things out, maybe changing a few things to get it exactly right. And then the next day, I'll usually do that again. I'll read through what I wrote and what I've edited so far, and then I'll give it one more pass, and then I'll go ahead and write another 600 to 800 words. So by the time I'm done with what most people would consider a first draft, it's more like almost done. And that's when I'll pass it off to my friends and people to take a look at it and tell me what they think. And then at that point, I'm finished with it and I'm ready to go after I make those changes or whatever. So yeah, generally about a week and a half to 2 weeks. And then after I pass it off to my friends, it might take another couple of days. So
I can't even imagine banging out an entire short story in that time. It's just insane to me. That's just so it's magic. It's a piece of magic. Let's see. I just completely lost my train of thought too. So this is a great day so far. Oh, inspiration. I want to ask about, I know you said Alfred Hitchcock and talking about librarians, but what do you think, do you have movies and other authors that when you were younger that kind of inspired you on the track to, hey, I want to start writing? And when do you think you decided I actually want to write at some point, if that makes sense?
Well, I was always interested in writing. Like when I was younger, my favorite author, my first love was Poe. I think a lot of people have that experience. And then various other authors that I read, Bradbury, Robert Bloch is a big hero of mine. And then when I got older, I started branching out into other types. I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction when I was a teenager, but as far as horror was concerned, I didn't read a lot of novels outside of Stephen King, Dean Koontz, the really mainstream stuff. But so Stephen King was an inspiration as far as like I love the way that King is able to just write about anything. And sometimes it seems like he challenges himself to see if he can make something scary that otherwise wouldn't be, like a bathroom sink or an old truck sitting in a field. So I took a lot of inspiration from him. Robert Bloch too. I like I like variety. I don't like sticking to the same thing. You know, some authors do that. I like the idea of maybe writing about a group of kids going trick or treating, or like like I said, a pastiche of an old weird tale, or I like jumping back and forth and challenging myself that way. And my favorite authors tended to do that. And I've always been interested in writing, but I never really considered it until like the late 2000s. I was like, I need to do something with my life, because I spent most of my 20s just staying at home, being a stay-at-home dad and stuff like that. So I was just doing this. And I was like, well, eventually these kids are going to grow up. I'm going to have to do something. I didn't go to school, I graduated high school. I didn't go to college, but I think I could do this. And then I muddled about that for about 10 years. And then finally around 2019, I was like, I have to commit to this and sit down and figure it out. And so I started reading a lot more again and getting my bearings, and just decided to do it.
I mean, that's a pretty good way. At some point, you just got to decide, hey, you know what? I want to do this, or at least try and see where I get. And I think you're getting somewhere. It's very good stories. So TJ, tell me a little bit about how editing worked with Straw World, and a little bit about that. I don't get to talk to editors much, so this is kind of fun.
Yeah, it was really fun for me. This is part of a series of books that I brought to Undertaker Books. It's the last project. The first being a book called Odd Jobs. That's them, Undertaker Books. The first book was called Odd Jobs, which was 6 kind of longer form short stories, not quite novelette territory, but it was 6 of them. And the subtitle for Odd Jobs is called excuse me, what was it? 6 files from the Department of Inhuman Resources. What happened was Carson Winter brought me a project that had 6 authors attached. They had all written weird or horror genre short stories, as mentioned, slightly long form, about workplaces or jobs, and they needed a home. So I took a look at it, and the stories were all wildly different, from different genres. We had Ike Young, we had Christy Nogle, we had Ivy Grimes, we had Erik, we had Caleb Stevens, and we had Carson Winter. And each one of the stories was so broadly themed, and just one was about a corporation, and one was about a strange bookstore, and one was about a professor investigating a disappearance, and one was about a science fiction oil company in the future. Like Caleb's was about a thriller, about a telephone that could take pictures of the dead. Like, it was a whole bizarre situation. And I was like, how am I as an editor going to take this and make it into a themed anthology? How am I going to relate all of these stories to one another? And in the chat with all the authors, we kind of we decided that we needed to title it, which is where we came up with Odd Jobs, which is where we came up with the Inhuman Resources. And so then I created a frame narrative that these companies that were in each of the stories were all subsidiaries of a larger, more evil corporation, if you will, and then sort of framed each story as a file that was in the department of this larger company. And they were all instances of things going wrong or weird. And so I read Erik's story called These Little Tyrants, which I really liked. And we had kind of been in talks about putting together a collection for him anyhow at that time. So we did that. And we put together Straw World, brought that to Undertaker. And the second project was Emma Murray's collection of debut short fiction called The Drowning Machine and Other Obsessions. So that was another single author collection. Those were the three projects I brought to Undertaker and said, these are the ones I want to publish. This is what I would like to do. These are the people I really like. Their writing speaks to me. We have clear vision. All we need you to do is put it out and market it. And so here we are today.
I love that. And that's a genius idea for the Odd Jobs ones, because when I was listening to you talk, I can imagine seeing all these stories and thinking, oh my God, how do I make this into literally anything that makes sense? But what you thought of, genius. It reminds me of Horror Store by Grady Hendrix,
Yep.
like the in-between little narratives and promotions. Like when me and my friend read that together, I was like, that's the little things that just made it so perfect and special, and that kind of thing just makes it more, I don't know, I just love it. It's like an Easter egg. It's a weird, I get to play along with this kind of thing, and it makes it whole story.
That was my favorite part of the whole experience. In Odd Jobs, I actually created a graphic for each story that would have been like representative of an HR file for each story, with like weird little logos for each company, and then some of those graphics refer to the other graphics in some of the other stories, and all of the elements kind of combine and overlap. And I don't know if you've noticed, but Erik has a thing for the Void, capital V, the Void. It's a big part of his mythos, which he was mentioning Demodorum, his favorite story in the collection, ends the collection. And what that does to me, I love Demodorum. It's one of my favorites of Erik's work, because it reminds me of those really cool short stories or parts of the novels that you read by like Clive Barker, where he starts talking about like quiddity and the gigantic like sea of consciousness that we all share, or like you get these really beautiful sort of fantastical explorations of the mythos behind the stories. But if you look at Erik's collection, the Void shows up quite a bit throughout, and that's sort of the darkness behind everything. Like even in the stories that don't directly reference the Void, you can feel the themes of like nihilism and uneasiness and shifting personalities, and all of that is also referenced obliquely in Erik's story in Odd Jobs, These Little Tyrants. So I made a little logo that's based on Azathoth, the agent of chaos, to represent the company that is referenced in his memo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's all linked. It's all a big, where's my marker board with all my little boards?
I am a sucker for what I like to call interconnectables. Like, it just does not matter. Goblin by Josh Mallerman is one of my favorite things on earth, just because like each short story you got a little wave, a little nod, a little background of Goblin to town, and I'm like, yes, thank you. It's just so much fun to stumble across. It makes everything more real almost. I can read about a city that I know about, no big deal, but did I read about a city that I just read about a couple of chapters back, or another short story by the same author? That's real.
It makes you feel like a detective when you're reading a book and you can pick up on the clues, and then you're like, wait, was this intentional? Or is this something going on? Like, you get a kind of like, it's an old trick. The intertextuality is just fun. When you can link books to one another and they speak to one another, it feels like you're becoming part of a bigger conversation of books talking all around you, and you get to listen and talk back in some cases. You get on, podcasts like these, and all those little Easter eggs that you can hide in so many little different ways. It's one of the things that drew me to Erik's work in the first place, was because he really enjoys that interconnectedness, not necessarily specifically of plot elements, but there's a very definite synthesis. And he mentions quite a bit that of his influences and where they come from. And I do think that the stories in this collection are really, really brilliantly underderivative in a way that shows their influences, but also shows a synthesis of the idea from those influences that's uniquely Eric's. And it's very curious about the human condition and about like what it is that keeps us going despite, you know, these horrible doubts and tribulations, and what tears us apart. And there's so many different themes. We actually created a short book for his birthday last year called Turn Your Eyes to the Void, which created, it compiles a bunch of essays and artwork and stuff just about Eric's work, and then put that together as like a little thing that we sent him. And
That's so cool.
Yeah,
That's so cool. And
Yeah.
now I'm even more excited for the more things he puts out, because now I'm going to be like searching the whole thing. Like, is there more? Is there something else? I don't know. I'm a huge like Dark Tower fan, so of course I'm all about the little Easter eggs here and there. Like, I will kick my feet and scream like a child. Like, it's just fun. So very excited. No pressure for any of your future work or anything.
Don't worry, I'm a huge like one of the things that I when I was younger, I was really into the films of Kevin Smith, and the thing that drew me into his comedy world was that all of his early films are all interconnected. Like I was so happy when because I watched his second film first, and then when I watched Mallrats, and then when I watched his first film Clerks, they're referencing things from like things that happened in this movie were referenced in the second film, and I was just delighted. And so I love interconnectedness. I don't know why I like it so much, but I really, really do love reference. Like, and almost everything I've ever written, I've slid either one or two like little pop culture references into the story. There, if you happen to know the reference, they're there. Like in the one off the top of my head is a Meatloaf lyric from Straw World about heart being out and still beating. It comes from a song, and I just threw it in there because I thought it was funny. You know, or I threw in The Man Who Collected Legati at the very end. I literally just used Vader's line to Luke after he tells him that he's his father. You know, search your feelings, you know it to be true. I think that's hilarious. Sometimes people might think it can take them out of a narrative to see something that's so obviously from pop culture, but I like it. So I throw stuff like that in there all the time. So
I
don't worry.
like that.
I think it's nice. It like credits your homage. It's like, you know, this is where I come from. And I don't like in Timmy, like my favorite story in the collection, maybe favorite, Timmy Thomerson's term is chock full of references.
Oh, every single name in that story, with the exception of one that's proper street names, character names, are from 80s directors, actors, special effects people. You know, all the kids' names are referencing, like one of them is Cassandra Peterson, who is Elvira. You know, Timmy Thomerson himself is named from Tim Thomerson, who was Doll Man, you know, things like that. So I love little pop culture references. They just tickle me for some reason.
It makes it fun. It makes it enjoyable to read too, in my opinion. And also the pop cultural reference, like we're reading horror, so it kind of lends a little to, hey, this is kind of a little bit real life. This is something you actually know about. It's not some random phrase they've come up with that means nothing. So I love that. It's so much fun. Let's see. Do you watch a lot of the new horror movies and TV shows that are coming out? I am super, super behind, so don't feel afraid if you are also. But if you don't, what are some of the older ones that you might have dug into and kind of led you here?
I tend to watch, I try to watch as many like of the big horror movies that come out every year. Anytime that a lot of people are talking about, this is a great flick, you need to see it, I generally try to make sure that I check it out eventually. Horror movies for me, my taste in horror movies has changed over the years. My formative years of watching horror, I was very much into like slasher films and you know, like gore and things like that. More atmospheric movies might have bored me a little bit. Like, I don't think 15 or 16-year-old me would have been interested in watching The Changeling, but I would definitely watch Friday the 13th Part 3 for the 15th time, you know. But as I've gotten older, I've read more. I've come to appreciate a well-told story, something a little bit slower. Recently, I watched Weapons, and it was okay. I liked it more than I liked Barbarian. I don't think that it affected me the way it affected a lot of people, but I still was entertained by it. But I watched Bring Her Back about a week ago, and oh my God, I absolutely loved that movie. That was excellent. So I do tend to watch horror television shows sometimes. I've watched most of what Mike Flanagan has put out. I've liked a lot of it. Some of it I haven't really cared for. I didn't like Midnight Mass, but I really liked House of Usher and stuff, just for how fun it was and ridiculous and over the top he went with it. I thought that was entertaining. But generally, no, horror shows I don't keep up with generally. Some of them I do, but like I think the last one I truly loved was The Outsider.
I liked that book too, though. So yeah, that was insane. What about you, TJ?
I'm all over the place. I like to watch unsettling movies. I'm kind of the opposite of Eric in terms of when I was a kid, I watched things like that were very slow and art house and weird. And nowadays, what I watch is more like no, it's still slow and art house and weird. If you like slasher movies, I think they're fun. I just don't. I don't get as much enjoyment out of them myself. I'm also married to someone who doesn't like horror, so it kind of can be difficult to find the right time to watch or enjoy stuff like that. TV wise, I don't really know that I've even heard of that many horror based TV shows that I've seen recently. Anyway.
I feel like I don't watch as many as I used to. I used to watch all the new horror movies, all TV shows that came out, and now I'm just like few and far between. I think I watch from when it comes on. Yeah.
It's not, I don't know. It's a weird thing for me because it's not genre based. For me, it's more interest based. I was really, really interested in going to see Weapons. I can't say that I wasn't entertained, but I really didn't like it. And it really bothered me in terms of like its structuring and in terms of its jarring tonality and its rapid pitch shifts. Like it just didn't really thrill me. And I didn't like that the tagline basically lied to me either. So I felt very betrayed. And I feel like that happens a lot. And I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older and I'm getting more particular about the kind of entertainment I like, or if movies are just
no. I think I actually understood that because I was just telling somebody the other day that I felt old and crotchety because I was like, I just don't feel like I like motion media much anymore. Like I love to read. I will give a book a chance in a heartbeat. Don't matter. But like a movie, I really got to think about if I want to invest an hour and a half into this, which is insane.
Yeah, it's crazy. And it's weird too, because if you're reading a book, it requires far more, involvement and investment than a movie, which really only takes about an hour and a half of your time. And you're just kind of very passively consuming it. And yet the attention is harder to pay for me to the movie than it is to the book, which is
absolutely
right in front of
that's the same exact feeling that I have here lately. I'm just like, this sounds weird, but I would rather read an 800-page book.
Yeah, and I mean, at least you can trust that the movie you see in your head is going to be good.
Absolutely.
You hope.
Well, you are the director.
Yeah, exactly. And the editor too. You get to put it all together and choose what you want. But that's also why I think writing is very satisfying, especially when things like that don't feel as exciting, or if you're disappointed at seeing a lot of the mainstream media horror representations. Like you create your own, and I think I don't know, Erik does that really well. He's not only making really, really interesting points and talking about nihilism and horrible stuff, but he never fails to entertain. That's the thing about storytelling, is you really do have to want to entertain as well as tell a good story. And I think Erik is kind of blessed with both of those, well as having, I don't know if you've heard him speak, but we'd love to get him to narrate his own.
Oh, absolutely. Because otherwise you're just sitting there and somebody's just telling you a bunch of facts and you're like, okay, well, I can just read this off the back of a shampoo bottle. But like Erik has to craft this in a way that's entertaining, gets the point across, and it's still serious in that. And it's a whole form of magic creativity that I'm just impressed by myself.
Yeah,
I agree. I have a question for you, Lexi. Which of these stories would you like to see turned into a movie if you had your choice?
Straw World. Like, just
No, you
absolutely
wouldn't.
hands down. Like, I'm telling you,
Atta girl.
like
Yes.
when I read the collection, I'm like, okay, this is great. I loved them, and I always only pick a couple to talk about, otherwise my review would be 14 years long. And I'm just like, I just really like this first story, like just the title story. Just it was so freaking good, and I'm like, this could be something like visually. I hate saying, hey, do you want this to be a movie? Because some people don't want their stuff turned into movies or video or whatever. But I'm like, this could translate so well into something so cool.
Absolutely. I think that's a good choice. Eric, what about you?
If I had to pick one, Jonah Wexley Abbott, just because I think it would be entertaining.
That would be good too.
Because it has everything, the old dark house, and it has intrigue, and you could do the flashbacks and show the stuff that's happening. I think I even know who I'd want to direct it, David Pryor. Put that man behind the camera, and I would be. He's easily my favorite horror director working right now. He doesn't get enough work. I mean, he's nailed everything he's done. Everything I've seen him do as a director, AM 1200, The Empty Man, and The Autopsy were all pitch perfect. And I mean, he adapted The Autopsy, which people have said was almost unadaptable, and he did it in such a good way. And he's Guillermo del Toro's got him directing something for Netflix here now, so hopefully that'll be good. But
I need more directors, producers, whoever's making these decisions to start doing more of the horror anthology, like TV show type miniseries. Like, could you imagine how many short stories that don't get enough attention because they're so short could get it for a TV show? Like Fear Itself, Masters of Horror. I still, I don't get worried about many things scary-wise, but I still get a little freaked out about Wendigos from Fear Itself, and that's a million freaking years ago. So I'm like, come on now.
That was a great show.
Oh, it
I love Fear Itself.
Masters of Horror was really good. I remember
a lot of good
years.
and I wish anthology horror would come back. I had a lot of hope when here recently we've had a revival of the Twilight Zone, which I didn't care for, but Cabinet of Curiosities with Guillermo del Toro, I'd hoped that it was going to be like the return, and unfortunately a couple of the episodes were really good. The Autopsy, the Viewing was really excellent. A couple of them were okay, a couple of them were bad. It was middling, I think, at the end of the day. But hopefully the format, I'm agree with you. There's a lot of short horror out there, really good stuff that's just begging to be adapted. And I hope one day that format comes back. I would have thought with streaming that people would get into it, but unfortunately they're not throwing money at it. That's why.
I don't understand. Everybody loves Black Mirror so much. Like, let's go. And by everybody, I mean me. But... like, I love stuff like that. It's such a fun way into more short stories and more everything and getting a little micro bite of something that you might not have watched otherwise. It's such a good way to get people into things. So I need everybody to start, signing petitions for that.
Absolutely.
But let's see. Is there anything else that you guys want to talk about that I haven't hit on? Because I feel like we went off the rails and I just started chatting, which I tend to do in some of my interviews.
It's great. I'm super organic and comfortable.
One thing that I forgot to ask about. I know that you just this is your first debut collection situation, so I doubt you've been to events and stuff. But are there events that you do want to eventually get to go to? Are you into that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would love to go to anything. If once I have the ability to travel and go out and do this stuff, I would love to do Stoker and Necronomicon and any place that'll have me or that I can get tickets to. I would love to do. I like people. I've been cooped up in my house for far too long. So yeah, I would love to do this stuff, just to be able to talk horror with people, to sit down and have a conversation. It doesn't have to be anything more than that. Meet the writers that I admire, whose work I love, so I can sit down and just tell them how much I hear my friends go to Stoker and they're like, I was talking to this person. It's like, I wish that were me.
Yes, absolutely. It's just doing these interviews, I've talked to so many authors that I never thought I would get to talk to. I talked to Christopher Golden for an hour one day, and I'm like, this is a guy that I used to read growing up and never thought it would happen. So it's just so much fun to get the kind of fangirl with people that write things that you get to read. It's crazy.
Well, it's awesome that you have that kind of curiosity behind the material that you read. I don't think that's that's kind of rare, and it's nice to be able to connect with someone who connected with the material that was
Absolutely.
presented.
So
really
thank
cool.
you guys for being on here and talking to me about it, and talking
No
to us
problem.
about it. I absolutely love it, and I would love for you guys to be back to talk to us about some more stuff. Purgatory is doing its big kickoff in October for our name change, so we're going to have a bunch of cool stuff coming up, hopefully, that you guys would like to jump on.
Very cool. Well, keep us in the loop. You've got our
Of
email.
course.
Absolutely.
And thank you guys again, seriously. I'm going to hit the end stream button, but it, of course, will just end the actual recording.